My name is Fred Copestake. I am founder of Brindis, a sales training consultancy. Over the past 22 years, I've travelled around the world 14 times, worked in 36 countries, and worked with over 10,000 salespeople. More recently, though, I've written a book, Selling Through Partnering Skills, which captures all of the latest thinking that will allow a salesperson to have a more modern, collaborative approach. And that's what I use now in the sales training that I deliver, mainly to B2B sales in a more complex selling environment, though it will be applicable to people who are working in this group. And as I go through the 25 tips in 17 minutes, I will certainly try and make as much reference to things which will be useful for you guys who are watching. So yeah, let's kick off. I better crack on because I've already used up one of the minutes that I said that I would use. When I start sales training, quite often I will ask the participants, would you invite your customers to sales training? And if I'm working virtually, as you can imagine we're doing that now, I'll give them a poll, give them a little set of options. The options which are yes, no, maybe, and what the hell are you talking about? And for me, it's really interesting to see what they come back with. Now, whatever the answer, I'm kind of going to go down the same route, which is to say, if you're answering no, why is that? You really have to have a think about yourself. The reason someone would say no is, well, because they don't have any training. That'll be more of a webinar, but if they're on training, well, that's not the answer. They're saying no is because they maybe think that training or sales training is going to be manipulative, or it's old-fashioned, or it's something that just isn't customer-centric. And so it's my job to very much say, we're going to have to change this, we're going to have to change it quickly. And so one of the ways that I will tend to do that is to get people to think about how sales has evolved. And maybe they're stuck thinking about things which are old-fashioned and don't necessarily work as well as they can now. So what I want to do is just go on a sort of quick history of sales, evolution of sales, and sort of pull out some of the elements that we can take from that are going to be useful before we move into the sort of the far more modern approach. So let's go back to the 50s and think about what was happening then. So think about 50s as an era. It was all about process. It was production was quite a big issue, and that was the sort of thing that was reflected in the way that people were selling. It was all very much about process. It was using tried and tested methods. It was using systems that we could make sure we're doing the correct thing time and time again. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. And certainly that's one of the tips, one of the ideas that I would share, is that we want to make sure we have systems in place. We want to make sure we have a sales process. Now, I'll talk a bit later about the sales process and buying process and how they have to be very carefully aligned. But certainly as a sort of another idea that I'd give to people is having a structure to a conversation that you're going to have. That for me is relevant to any salesperson. And whether you're in a sort of B2B world, whether you're working as a KPI, certainly having something in a way that you can open up the conversation by grabbing attention, then asking questions which will show interest in them, and starting to explore what pain points and what needs they might have. Then thinking about how we can take our solution, our remarkable solution, to be able to create an element of desire, and how we'll finish off any conversation by having some kind of action, some kind of advancement, something that moves forward. So for me, that's one of the ideas we can very much take from the 50s and make sure that we're using that in the modern environment. So let's move on to the 60s and have a think about that era. So for me, the 60s was all about the brain, it was all about thinking, and I kind of think psychedelia and firepower and all that kind of stuff. And what we see in the way that sales training and the way sales was reflected in this is that a lot of the stuff was around personality selling. It was around the psychology of sales. It was understanding how would your customer think, and so how can you adapt your approach to do something that's right for them. And so absolutely, for me, that would make sense in the current selling environment. Can we adapt and flex so we're doing stuff that's comfortable for them? Can we think about what's going to be important to them? And can we make sure that that's what our solution, that's what we're going to sell, is going to align to? So yeah, very much that's one of the ideas that we can take and we can use today to be relevant. So what else have we got? Let's think about the 70s. So for me, 70s was all about benefit selling. Features, advantages, benefits. We know that all products and services have got features. which will deliver some kind of advantage, so what it's there for, but really it's what's in it for me, what is the customer taking away from that? And that's where we've got to concentrate any kind of selling message, any kind of marketing message, anything that we're saying to customers, potential clients. Why should they care? And then one of the tests for this is to just ask yourself, so what? If you're going to be saying something to somebody, so what? Are they going to care? Is there some kind of value? Is there some kind of benefit in there that's going to make sense to them? So again, we can take that away from the 70s as we move into the 80s, which for me was the kind of funniest era really in selling. I always kind of think of this kind of Gordon Gekko, greed is good type thing. It's that close, objection handling type era. And though I wouldn't say that's not entirely not useful, because we can certainly think about objection handling, which I wouldn't even call that, because I don't like the psychology in it. It's what we label it, so we maybe do have to think about it like it. But certainly treating concerns with concern and some of the language structures and way in which we can deal with that does make sense. But this kind of try to get to close as soon as possible and batter away any hurdles, I'm not so comfortable with that. And then particularly when you look at what happened in the 90s, where consultative selling was really kind of invented, then that is where we could certainly take a lot of learning, a lot of stuff which would make us very current even today. So if we look at what happened then, that was where Neil Rackham and his team sat in on lots and lots of sales meetings and saw the very best salespeople were probably not really doing what they were trained to. They were asking questions. They weren't sort of diving into this close and that Glenn Ross type stuff. They were concentrating on need. They were thinking about where's the customer now? Where do they want to be? And actually, is that gap, is that distance something they really understand? And by asking questions, we can help them do that. That's what a good consultant does. So the wider those two positions, perceptual positions, are apart, the more someone's going to want to need to do something. And when we're in sales mode, we can very much ask questions in a way which helps them think. And that's value that we start to add. It's not manipulative. It's not something that we shouldn't do. It's something we very much should do because it's going to help people to think. And that's really where we're starting to go with selling now. It's helping people to think and bringing value that way. And so when we look at the noughties, it's kind of an extension of that. If the 90s was needs focused, the noughties were about value focus. So it brings in that consultative approach. But what it's also doing is saying, these are the impacts, these are the things that I can do for the business. And so there's lots of thinking that we can do to really do our homework properly and think, well, yeah, that's where they're potentially going to have a problem, that's an issue, or that's a gain. It doesn't have to be just pain stuff. It can be something where we think that's what our customers are going to want to do. And by sitting with them and helping them to understand that, that's what's going to deliver a lot of value to them. So naughty selling, 90 selling for me is a very solid foundation for the stuff we need to do today. But arguably it's still 20 years old. So what other things have happened? When we look at the 10s, what I would say to salespeople is that this is the decade where you really had to concentrate on your stature, sales stature, personal brand. That would be what we would call it today. So it was about making sure that customers understood that you were the go-to person. Your company, your offer might be right for them, but why should they want to talk to you? Make sure their profile, their positioning, and that how customers and potential customers view them is right. Takes us to 20s then. So, where are we now? Well, lots of changes aside, which I'll just touch on in a minute. The 20s for me, if we talked about consultative in 90s and we talked about being more of a kind of value adder in the noughties and then thinking about our sales stature in the 10s, this is about becoming more collaborative. This is working far closer with customers, working together with them to really co-create value, to do things together, 2 and 2 equaling 5. And using different thinking, using different processes, using different ways of working to help that. Now, I pin a way to do that around a particular way of thinking, which I'll cover in a minute. But I don't really want to talk more about the 20s without kind of talking about the elephant in the room, which is COVID and virtual selling. Now, one of them was going to happen anyway, and then that was virtual selling. What's happened is that COVID has sped this up. So in the 20s, salespeople need to be very comfortable in working lots of different kind of media. So whether that is working virtual, whether it's working over screen, whether it's using emails, whether it's using text, WhatsApp, whatever way they can get the message across. At the moment we can't do meetings, they will come back. And so what we will see in the 20s is a kind of hybrid salesperson. And so there'll be a number of tools, techniques, things which people will have to understand to be able to really deliver well. So at this stage in training, I'd often get people to reflect on what are you actually selling then? Are you more of a benefit salesperson? Are you working from that people buy from people type approach? Are you still close type mindset? Are you positioning more as a trusted advisor? Are you trying to recognize and communicate value? Or are you really into this more modern way of working where it's all about stop, listen, collaborate? Yeah, apologies to Vanilla Rice, I know I've got that slightly wrong way around, but for me it is stopping, it's slowing down, it's thinking, it's being able to work together to collaborate more. And so that's what I want to explore a little bit. Now, why would you want to explore that with me? Why should I be the salesperson? And I'll just throw in a little story now about how sales was my very first job. So first job in sales, aged 8 years old. It was to do with having the family business was a builder's merchant, which also sold kitchens and bathrooms. And on Boxing Day, that was when we had the annual sale. And when I was 8, I was allowed to go along to help. And so they kitted me out in this sort of big orange polo shirt and this massive kind of brown warehouse coat thing, and took me along and put me in the tile store. So I was going to help sell tiles. Now, the premises was this big old Victorian watermill made of stone. And so in December, it was stone cold, literally. There I was, little 8-year-old, big baggy clothes, and I was freezing. But I was having such a laugh. It was brilliant. I was talking to people, I was trying to understand what they needed, I was helping them, I was finding stuff, I was putting stuff in boxes, I was writing a little chit to make sure I got my commission. And I just had a really good laugh. And I guess that's where the bug took over, and so my background has always been commercial since then. University to study commerce and Spanish, worked as a salesperson with an industrial. I ended up moving then into full-time training 20-some years ago, including running the training academy for Corona Extra, so the Mexican beer, the good Corona, if you like. So yeah, I did all sorts of them. That was 5-6 years of really good fun. Travelling around a lot then, and it's something I've always done. You know, I've travelled around a lot, as I mentioned, 36 countries, worked with all sorts of high-profile clients, from breweries, truck manufacturers, banks, and just absolutely love that variety. I like helping people. I like helping people stand out and be different. And for me, that was then where, to keep the saw sharp, I started really thinking about, where are we going with sales? What can we do to make salespeople excellent? And this is where I came across the concept of partnering skills, PQ. So a bit like the lesser known cousin of IQ and EQ. And so I looked at this stuff, which had been researched back in the late 80s, early 90s by a guy called Steve Dent. And he was working with companies or organizations that were partnering at a high level. But one of the things he said is that organizations don't partner, people do. And there are certain skills which are involved in that, and that people can learn these and develop them to get better at partnering. And at the time I was doing quite a lot of work in channel anyway, with channel managers and partner managers. So I thought, well, I'll have a look at these. And as I looked and understood them, it became clear to me that, well, these would work for any salesperson. So whether you're in channel, whether you're at the top end of organisation, whether you're involved in sort of smaller, less sophisticated sales, these elements of PQ, if you weave them into the way that you work, it would absolutely make sense. And so let's have a look at these elements of PQ and think, what ideas, what things can we do to bring them into our way of selling? So it's made up of 6 elements. And the first element of these is trust. So trust, as you can imagine, is the foundation for relationships. It's a really important part of what we do. And so what I encourage salespeople to do is think, well, how can you build trust with people? What are the things that you can deliberately do to try to build that? Because we can do some things deliberately. And this is where I came across the trust equation. So David Meister, professor at Harvard University, talks about this equation where there's elements of credibility, so knowing your stuff, reliability, doing what you say you do, intimacy, so people feeling close to you because you will be sensitive to information they share, that they'll feel safe in working with you. But all of these elements are in the equation are divided by self-orientation. And it says that we can do all of these things, which I'd absolutely encourage, but if you're only doing them for your own benefit, well, that kind of pulls the element of trust building down. So that is something that I would say to us, we can do as salespeople, is to really think about how can I deliver on those elements of credibility, reliability, and intimacy, but am I doing it with the other party's best interest at heart as well? And for me, that ties neatly into the second element of PQ, which is having a win-win orientation. And that's not uncommon for people to talk about win-win or mutual benefit, but that can be used in so many different ways. So first, it's actually working out what does the other party want, what's their value, what is going to be good for them. But funnily enough, with salespeople, another thing that I would include with this is that be aware of your own commerciality. Don't just give stuff away, because otherwise that balance gets lopsided. So certainly thinking about what both parties are taking from it makes a lot of sense for me. As is how we discuss things to resolve problems, to resolve conflicts, to negotiate. Always keeping that eye on we want to both come out of this well makes a lot of sense. So I think that's another idea that I want to put into the mix. What's the third element? This is about interdependence. So it's about having your success depending on somebody else's. And so this is to do a little bit about being able to give up control and let other people get involved in what you're doing. So that's not just from the customer, it's also talking about when you've got a team involved, and so we know that bigger, more sophisticated sales, lots of folk get involved. We've got to make sure that we are comfortable with that and can deal with it. Before we can move on to number 4, or I say move on, I'm just talking these sequentially, but for me they all knit together, they're all very much part and parcel of each other. And that's self-disclosure and feedback. So this is being clear and constant in exchange of information. So it's giving customers information about yourself, it's telling them about you, letting them know what your expectations are, and even feeding back to them when they're not helping you to help them. Too often salespeople that get relationship focused get worried about, well, I can't say that to the customer, it might upset them, it's not a good thing. But actually it's a better thing to do, it's a stronger thing to do, and ultimately people would respect that. So being strong in those abilities to be able to say to the customer, hey, look, you're not helping me here, or that's not the right thing, or even I think you might make a mistake there, that isn't the best way to go, is something that will help us in a more modern collaborative sell. Fifth element of PQ is comfort with change. Now, so for me, salespeople are change agents. We are selling change. We're actually challenging status quo for people pretty much. So it's about doing different things, doing them differently. If we're going to be wanting to get people to do that, we've got to be comfortable with that ourselves. So for me, it's very much understanding the change curve is useful for doing that. So it's an idea which we can start to do, or start to understand to get those quick wins. The last element is future orientation. So again, this is about looking forward, it's about knowing what our common goals are, we're working together with a customer, together with a client, thinking about how can we make sure that we're deciding on things based about where we're going, not necessarily where we have been. Because we know that decision making can often be made looking backwards, and we kind of get that, oh, that didn't work before, or, oh yeah, I tried that. But with so much change, with so much happening, with so much going on, being able to look forward and think about things in the future tense makes a lot of sense to be a good salesperson. I've got to the 25 without even touching the value framework. So So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on for another 5 or 6 minutes to talk about the value framework which sits within the book. That I can generate 5 quick tips off the back of it, because there's 5 elements to the framework, which is the value framework, VALUE, where the V stands for validate. So in this group we like little maxims, don't we? And for me at this stage it's about it takes 2 to tango. Yeah, we've got to make sure that we've got the right potential sort of customer. So training salespeople in my world, this is all about qualification. It's getting people to look at templates. It's getting them to think about sort of various criteria that would need to be ticked, and making sure that people match up. And a big thing in sales is qualifying out. It's saying, look, that's not really a good opportunity for me. Now, of course, at more advanced level, and the stuff that we would know would be scorecards. A scorecard is a classic example of how we can validate before we even start a conversation. We might say, look, it's not even worth it. We don't have to get into the conversation to work out whether we've got a potential good sale going on here. And move on to the A of value for align. So alignment is about doing your homework. It's about understanding the customer, understanding what's important to them, thinking about where we can potentially add value, what we can do, what's the benefits for them. Again, let's use dead language. We talk about what's the pain, what's the prize, and then how are they going to make that decision, and how can we work with them for that. What we're seeing in modern selling is that people's buying process is really, really important, and that sales isn't something we do to somebody. We've got to fit in the way in which they operate. Now, with that on, we might be able to take more of a control of this. We can guide them through it, we can help them, we can lead them, which again is very much a modern sales approach for me. But what I'll often do is tell salespeople, just be aware of how they're making decisions and who's involved. You know, we know Gartner statistics are saying that year on year the number of people in the decision-making unit is increasing. So it's gone from, I think 4 years ago I was talking about 5.6 people, whatever 0.6 is, to 8, and the numbers last year were 11 people. Now, whether those people who've got something to say about a sale are going to go up or down now, it's going to be really interesting. I think in some cases there might be more people involved, where we get more legal, more financial, more people who are going to have to put their 2 pence in on a decision. Though I've also read some stuff about people being given more responsibility of just saying, look, we need to do something, we need to do things fast, get on with it. So they've got higher spends, they'll make decisions faster. So part of the homework, part of the thinking is to really work out how are they operating and adapting to the way in which we can work with that. Let's move on to the L for leverage. So leverage is about going and having those good conversations. And I kind of outlined that with the AIDA, the attention, interest, desire, action type framework we could use for conversation. But it's taking our homework and it's having good, solid conversations with people to understand and help them understand that we can work together. There's potential to add value, there's good benefit for them, which we can then move into the U or underpin element. So underpin is like supporting. So I'd often be training salespeople in writing proposals, in delivering really dynamic presentations, working well virtually, working well online. All of those parts come out in that element of the framework before we can move into the E, evolve, which is how we can kind of grow that relationship, how we can keep things moving forward, deliver an excellent customer experience, and which is why customer success management for me is also a very interesting developing area where we can learn quite a bit. So I don't know if I ever delivered or if I just got my timings completely wrong, but certainly I hope there's some good ideas in there for people, little thought starters. You know, I could probably talk about any single one of those for 20 minutes at a time, but I wanted to just give people a bit of a flavour of collaborative selling and some of the elements that are involved in it. Where are we going? In a nutshell, it's taking good, solid sales best practice that already exists. It's taking our elements of PQ, the partnering skills, and it's bringing them together, which for me the value framework works really well to do that. That's what we can focus people on to help them do that. As I said, it's in the book. That's the stuff I write about. I probably guessed I can talk about this. I'm passionate about this stuff. So if anybody wants to talk more about this, get in touch with me.